An introduction to the science of the underdog. I'm not suited for these times, but I am suited for the world I created. That's a quote from minimalist composer Lamont Young. Rethinking success and failure. Why are so many valuable people chronically unsuccessful? Must we blame the families of individuals who never got recognized for their accomplishments, or is there a deeper problem? Irving Finkel spoke in recent years at the Royal Institution about cracking ancient codes, specifically cuneiform writing, while citing a very obscure historical figure named Edward Hinks. He said, "In my opinion, the world is littered with unacknowledged geniuses." When it comes to most kinds of science, a hole or some sort of void typically fills with something. Although there are concepts in physics that have to do with things like negative feedback loops for the most part, a lot of things in the universe tend to balance themselves out. The law of entropy states that an ice cube will melt at room temperature, not just sit there and get colder. You dig a hole in your backyard, and after you leave it behind, it will not just get bigger on its own. When it comes to human behavior, social science says that it will somehow dig itself deeper. Thus, a lot of sociology reminds me more of how a black hole works. The more stuff it has, the more stuff it gets. The planet Venus is an example of a runaway greenhouse effect, where there was a time when it got so hot that the hotter it got, the more it heated up even more. Why do advanced civilizations like ours tend to enable the overrated, while the underrated get buried in obscurity? Are we really as advanced as we could be in every way? Benjamin Franklin was known to look into the future, often thinking about what things would be like in a few centuries. Franklin said, "The rapid progress of the sciences makes me, at times, sorry that I was born so soon. Imagine the power that man will have over matter a few hundred years from now. We may learn how to remove gravity from large masses and float them over great distances. Agriculture will double its produce with less labor. All diseases will surely be cured, even old age. If only the moral sciences could be improved as well, perhaps men will cease to be wolves to one another as human beings could learn to be human." Daniel Everett was a missionary to the Amazon jungle, where, ironically, an isolated tribe called the Paraha converted him to their worldview, not vice versa. Everett states that one of the strongest Paraha values is no coercion. One doesn't tell other people what to do. Also, there appears to be no social hierarchy. They have no formal leaders. Their social system is similar to that of many hunter-gatherer bands in the prehistoric world. He mentioned that we, as humans, have learned to cooperate in ways different from animals in the context of discussing a modern, quote, sick society, end quote. He goes on to say, one of the greatest differences between humans and chimpanzees is we cooperate at a much greater level, said Everett. So what evolution has to say about humans from that perspective is not that competition is our basic drive, but cooperation is our basic drive, and that humans are the most human when they're cooperating, and the less human when they are competing. When I was a lot younger, I attended a sort of seminary and was exposed to a myriad of teaching styles. One teacher seemed to be everyone's favorite. He was a rotund, baby-faced, middle-aged man from Michigan with an expressive sing-song and somewhat scratchy voice. He would pride himself on the amount of repetition he would use in order that his students would remember key points and pass their tests better. As a teacher myself, I've found that concepts like these can be beneficial to most students, especially when trying to introduce new concepts. Therefore, my redundant redundancy is redundantly redundant with redundant redundancy. Having shared these ideas with various types of people over the years has caused me to note the details that most people, especially powerful people, have trouble with. If there's an idea that I believe to be important, chances are you will see it again, hear it again, and at times more than twice. When the Cowardly Lion repeats courage, when Tevier repeats tradition, and you can bet that I am in line giving my blanket answer to everything. Status. What causes success? Status. How do you get cared for? Status. Who creates justice? What creates justice? Status. How do you get freedom? Status. And how do you get anything in life, whether you deserve it or not? Status. What musical artists are on your playlist? People with status. What's on your television? People with status. What kind of stuff typically ends up in your social media news feeds? People with status. Who designed your house, your recipes, your car, and probably everything else you buy and consume? Yes, people with status. What kinds of people are in any kind of power and authority over you, including spiritual and political leaders, managers, landlords, influencers, etc., etc.? People with status. In other words, alpha-type born leaders. Aside from the mainstream, the main thing is true with counterculture. The same thing. It's just more status people who are not as famous, but are alphas in their own subculture and who actually like kombucha. Besides me identifying as an ideologue. In the context of my views on status-related teachings, I am also an ideologue. In addition to being a status ideologue, my views on status, just about every problem in life and society and everyone I know is touched by this systemic social pandemic. From healthcare choices to where I'm allowed to hang out, my overall status ultimately determines the outcome. In addition to calling myself an ideologue, I also identify myself as an apologist. An apologist is someone who speaks or writes in defense, hence the Greek word origin, of a belief, a cause, or a person. The term originated with early Christian leaders who defended their faith, a practice known as apologetics, like C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton. Today, while the term can be used neutrally or positively, it's often used derogatory to imply that a person is defending something controversial, unpopular, or indefensible. Along from being an apologist, I am, to use a more common version of a similar word, unapologetic to the fact that this course is basically indoctrination and ranting rhetoric. That's why I try to inject humor as much as I can. Like, for instance, I have a cat named Woof, W-O-O-F, Woof Woof, and I have a little red car named the Yellow Submarine. I've been treated like a criminal throughout most of my life. I would have to say that I am used to it by now, but I admit it only gets worse over time. In addition to being punished, I am hated even more when my punishers realize that there are no grounds for accusation. The more I study things like social ranking, I'm often reminded of what a, quote, criminal, end quote, I really am. I was not born with leadership traits, but born with unusual abilities, and that is not my crime. My crime against this status-based civilization is that I sought recognition and attention for my accomplishments when I was supposed to do the opposite. My destiny in this society was to give my attention to those who already had too much attention, to stay busy, to remain silent and invisible. I didn't really have a choice but to keep disappearing because it was undermining my mental health to the point of risking some real serious harm in my life. They turned my career into a hobby while I was supposed to support powerful people whose creative, quote, careers, end quote, in comparison were what I would consider amateurish. I was tired of serving people who did little to nothing to help develop the skills I possessed, and I had a crazy thought that it was my turn to reap the benefits of my creative output. At the same time, I was literally fighting for my life. Dream killers are in reality people killers. As a result of the crimes against society, I was, through a crowdsourced endeavor, demoted to somewhere between the working poor and the houseless. I have countless examples based on personal experiences to determine this rank. Everywhere I went, I ended up with two choices: servitude or solitude. It is obvious to me and to others who have been ostracized from civilization how agonizing it is to try to function at the bottom. And at the same time, people at the top are all so miserable. I have tried to date rich, middle-aged gay men over the years until I realized not only how they need to constantly minimize me, in some ways, they're more miserable than I am. They have so much power, and yet they feel like they're at the bottom. They get so much money, recognition, validation, and attention for really contributing little to nothing to the world. And the more overrated they are, the more insecure. The more insecure they are, the more they suffer and cause the suffering to those under and around them. The irony is, the suffering of those at the bottom is miserable because often they have to fight just to eat and survive. People living at the top of society often have interesting stuff happen. We know that because we see them and hear them too much. However, people at the bottom often have lives that are just plain surreal. I call it sociological phenomenon. It's when, quote, reputable, end quote, people act in a predatory manner around those lesser people they believe are ignored. These opportunists remain in positions of influence and continue to be recognized as benevolent and trustworthy. Just consider all the entertainment executives and how they behave alone when, with a vulnerable person or a young person. When I was dismissed throughout my childhood and my adult life with things like, those kinds of people just don't do those kinds of things. Dances with woofs. Our civilization is based on leaders and followers. Everything seems to be fine, as well as everyone takes their place, at least those on top. When Benjamin Franklin referred to people as wolves, perhaps that is a good place to start in trying to understand human behavior. The canine world. A litter of puppies will have the alpha, the underdogs, and the weakest dog, which we call the runt. In our sick society, this is how people are supposed to think. Things that are said to the alpha. We expect you to lead. Things that are said to the underdog. We expect you to follow. And things that are said to the runt. We expect you to die. Having sought out success gurus and various opportunities, beginning as far back in my teens, I found that even if I did everything right, I did not get the same results as others were getting. This led me, for the most of my adult life, to blame myself, because that was the underlying theme of most of the motivational mumbo-jumbo I was subjecting myself to. In recent years, I've uncovered several vocational support organizations and programs that were nothing more than a sham. One of the first kinds of groups I got involved with at an early age was a network of a marketing company that posted a help wanted ad at a health food store. One of the people who worked with this particular company told me that she just got all her friends to sign up, and within months she started getting these huge checks for thousands of dollars. Ironically, she was a suburban socialite, and compared to me, I didn't have any close friends at the time. In addition, most of the people I came in contact with were urban, educated older people who were well acquainted with pyramid scams. I also found that no matter what I did, I failed at it, unless I happened to be in a position where somebody empowered me with enough recognition and support. I could also deliver and impressed others in my field and had several things to offer. They gave me something I couldn't do myself: advocacy. Self-advocacy is a myth. Anyone who tells you to advocate for yourself is as logical as going to the courthouse to marry yourself. It all comes down to depending on others to cooperate. Even classic success books tell you basically that it depends on your ability to get other people to do stuff. In some ways, I wonder if the whole concept of leadership in itself is just somehow wrong, considering how leadership is portrayed as just leading people without consideration of their ability to contribute to the world compared to the amount of power they possess or require. By the end of I was in my 40s, chronic illness, other barriers led me to find myself more and more stuck in professional obscurity. I couldn't even pay people to publish my articles and works, and if they reluctantly did, I found several projects of mine that had been taken down and suppressed in the media without notice or explanation. I also noticed trends where I was being upstaged by others who, by most accounts, did not seem to have much of anything to offer to the world, or, in my opinion, nothing very original. I began a fascination with paleoanthropology, neuroscience, zoology, and sociology. I was also fascinated with early proto-civilizations and perhaps trying to find a clue as to how or when we went wrong as a species to cause so much insanity. If I were doing everything right and I was to blame myself for all my failures, how could that be the cosmic answer? The Curse of Cassandra. One of the things I discovered while watching a science show was an excerpt from ancient myths about Apollo and his attempts to seduce a young royal maiden named Cassandra. When she refused, he not only somehow gave her the ability to see the future, but he also cursed her with an uncanny disability to be ignored by everyone in her life. This caused her to go insane, which contributed even more to her already being discredited. I began to think of people in my life from an early age who did not possess significant creative abilities. These were people who wanted to be recognized as creative, but simply who were not gifted. They would get jealous and even angry at certain people who got positive attention for their accomplishments and would find ways to get attention and credit for themselves while succeeding at making the gifted people invisible. It may or may not have had anything to do with magic and curses, although there might have been a psychological element about these efforts, considering things like hypnotic suggestion and various social tactics. Alpha dog people, in some ways, behave like alpha dogs. They are the ones who are allowed to bite the underdogs. The underdogs enable the alphas, and thus everything works in a sort of order. There might be exceptions to these social orders, like a puppy that was dropped on his head, which became hyper-aggressive and started biting all the other puppies, so they started fearing that crazed pup. I find it strange how many times I encounter abusers who became successful in the arts and entertainment world. Some of my earlier studies on the subject had to do with baboons and stress-related to where they were placed in their ranking order. Even roosters had a literal pecking order, often noted that the topcock is the one with the most shiny feathers. A few human examples of status due to biology were how a stinky t-shirt from a scared person produced an unconscious reaction in test subjects. In addition, when menstrual cycles are synchronized in other women living together, they would sync with the woman who had those born leader type characteristics. Therefore, success is partly your product, partly your motivation, partly your behaviors, and ultimately success has mostly to do with your biology. When most people preach about hindrances to success, they focus on how many people came from underprivileged groups and were able to conquer those odds and rise to power regardless of their origin. From what I have seen in the lives of these powerful people, they had to fight a lot harder, work a lot harder, and suffer more in order to become successful. However, they did. Although I find these stories admirable, I decided to take a mental note of whether they showed alpha characteristics, and sadly, I have observed that 100% of these self-made success stories represented individuals who were alpha types, whether they came from privilege or not. This is where I decided to coin terms to further these points. Underdog groups versus underdog individuals are things to think about when considering various success stories. An alpha type emerging out of an underdog group is, quote, privileged, end quote, in the sense that because of their position within an underprivileged community. In addition, certain privileged communities, especially among wealthy folks, like to use these alphas as mascots in order to maintain an illusion of diversity. This ironically created a pseudo-inclusion while maintaining the fact that they're just giving alpha privileges to someone who is already an alpha. This is where I coined another little nasty term I call perceived privilege. It's a misconception that just because someone appears to be privileged, that they are assumed to be an alpha-type person. Although I appreciate the efforts of progressive organizations and governments to create forms of fairness and equality, in my experience, those who are endowed with power, regardless of whether their origins are from privileged or underprivileged communities are those who, on some kind of biological level or otherwise, already possess a significant amount of power. The Bara effect. In addition to the fact that I've had a lifetime of seeing the underrated get promoted, and vice versa, there was something unusual that I have also observed in society. I call it the Bara effect. Unlike the Mandela effect, where people, for instance, misquote the same movie line, this phenomenon is attributed to the baseball legend Yogi Berra. It's often that the most invisible kid in class gets overlooked and thus not even considered if she or he has anything at all to offer, but this often has to do with somebody who is hiding in plain sight. Everyone knows baseball, knows the guy who, at the time, had the biggest numbers and awards. However, when it came to announce the 4 greatest living baseball players, he was strangely overlooked. I think back to when I was in college. I was not only at the top of my class, I even outperformed one of the teachers in a transcription assignment where studying musical notation. It was clear to the students and faculty I possessed unusual musical abilities. However, it was treated like some sort of novelty, as if I was some kind of sideshow freak. I finished that program with being, as far as I can recall, the most accomplished musician, touching several areas and proficient on the most amount of instruments, and I soon ended up broke, homeless, without friends or a job in that field. A similar thing happened in high school when I composed a classical piece and performed with a small violin section according to several unusual accomplishments for a 17-year-old. I was single, had no friends, no car, no job, no vehicle, no place of my own. I learned the hard way that for some people, being the best at something doesn't mean you can get recognized as the best or be successful at it. It is common that there will be alpha types who believe they are the ones who are entitled to reap the rewards that the underdogs accomplish. Bob Ross didn't say that, but he should have. Neither did Margaret Keane. Ranking and status, sore subjects for some. I cannot think of a time that I had brought up this subject that I wasn't met with opposition or mostly just ignoring and denying its existence. The only exception is when I happen to be teaching an audience that values and recognizes my work in the context of some kind of established institution or position in society. Sadly, the only time these ideas have gotten any positive attention were when I was teaching students, specifically in virtual classes, and talking one-on-one with houseless people or similar situations. I hate the irony of this, and at the same time, just the fact that me even trying to communicate these ideas further validates my point. If I am valued and recognized, I am considered and heard. There have been times where I might be in a position where I'm trying to teach people, where they are challenging my position, in addition to where I might be introducing these concepts with others, or I might actually captivate them for a moment with some type of elaborate presentation. A very unpopular thing that I've introduced is a little something I call the cashew trick. Give somebody a cashew nut, or several of them, and eat. Then mention the kind of people who harvest cashews, and typically the same people who are not privileged enough to eat cashews. For several poverty-stricken people, that's simply all they know is, we eat cashew fruit, but we don't eat the delicious cashew nuts because we send those for other people to eat. That's their reality. It makes people want to spit out those yummy nuts because they feel such guilt. Now, I pour myself a big handful and munch happily. That freaks people out even more. If you are listening to this, chances are you are a cashew nut eater, not a cashew fruit eater. Be grateful. In some ways, even if you have to shop at the dollar store, you are from an alpha dog community. Even cheap cashews can be found at discount stores. Cashews are just one symbol of the global caste system. And even though I have been homeless at times, I have eaten garbage, among other things, that had me represent the bottom of American society. I was still quite privileged compared to a lot of people overseas, where even those who had a job would have less privileges than I did, if you did the math. Cashew fruit eaters, for instance, if you study enough of the occupational hazards in addition to the low pay and other crimes against humanity, you will find that compared to the lowest of those living at the bottom of Western civilization, overall, might actually have a lower quality of life. If my deplorable cashew trick wasn't offensive enough to high-status people, my caste assessment is something that I have yet, at least at this point, have had the privilege of completing. Everyone seemed to want to hyper-focus on the economic status when it came to whether our society, in particular the United States, was secretly a caste system, C-A-S-T-E. But aside from money, the issue that always makes everything messy is simply power. You can have money, and without power, you will likely lose that money. But with power, you will likely get money just because money tends to follow power and not the other way around. That's why I propose that America, in addition to other beloved civilized nations, functions in a caste system in the context of the attention economy. So when it comes to the word attention, this comes in many forms. Some public figures make a living at generating negative attention. They might have a public persona that makes their colleagues appear antagonized and thus play a part in media enterprises. Corporate executives and politicians get all kinds of attention, whether it's positive or negative. They often remain in powerful positions of leadership and influence no matter what they do. The people that I relate to the most, because of my background, are those in arts and entertainment, in addition to media, education, and wellness-related work. Since I am a chronic illness survivor, I also relate to those who suffer and struggle daily with debilitating conditions. Being openly gay and leaning somewhat left in my views, I can identify with sexual minorities, and some of these things have given me the ability to relate to other groups that have been alienated from various communities, freedoms, and opportunities. Having been on the outside and the inside of various types of communities and organizations has given me a lot of diverse advantage points. One disturbing observation I have noted is that when overrated entertainers get obviously, obsessively possessive of their fan base, it reminds me of other alpha types who get possessive of their support base. Not to minimize the suffering of other peers who live with various illnesses, it's just when an alpha type suffers, they are accustomed to getting a lot more attention than the average disabled person. In fact, disabled people are probably the most overlooked people in our society, with possibly the exception of senior citizens, the houseless, and inmates. I have met a lot of influencers who are publicly disabled, and it is staggering how much support these people get. In fact, it seems to convince the public that all disabled people get the same kind of validation because some media spokesperson gets a significant amount of attention. I hear them talking about how bad things are, and I cringe. I have tried to collaborate with them over the years and gave up. Ironically, there are disabled alphas, just as there are alphas in housing projects, alphas in prison, and within every type of community, whether we label them as privileged or not. Therefore, we need to differentiate between underdog groups and underdog individuals if we are begin to tackle this very complicated subject.